Before New York had the mafia everyone knows today, there were only a few immigrant neighborhoods, struggling families, and small street gangs. So how did those small groups eventually become the most powerful organized crime network in America? In the late 1800s, thousands of Italian immigrants arrived in New York, especially from Sicily and southern Italy. Many settled in crowded neighborhoods where poverty was common. Jobs were difficult to find, and trust within the community was extremely important. Most immigrants were simply trying to build honest lives, but a small number of criminals saw an opportunity inside these isolated communities. They began forming small groups that made money through gambling, theft, intimidation, and illegal protection schemes. At first, these groups were small and divided, each operating within a limited neighborhood, but they soon discovered something important. New York was enormous, and controlling even a few streets could bring money, influence, and loyal followers. One of the earliest notorious methods was known as the Black Hand. Business owners and successful immigrants sometimes received threatening letters, demanding money in exchange for leaving them alone. The letters created fear throughout Italian neighborhoods, especially among people who had worked for years to build small businesses. The Black Hand was not one unified organization. Instead, different criminals copied the same method, turning intimidation into a profitable business. This helped create a dangerous reputation around Italian criminal groups. Even though most Italian Americans had nothing to do with organized crime, but the real transformation was still coming. Then, in 1920, Prohibition changed everything. The United States banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, but millions of Americans continued wanting alcohol. That created a massive underground market. Italian criminal groups quickly recognized the opportunity. Instead of earning money from small neighborhood operations, some groups began making enormous profits through illegal alcohol distribution. Money brought power. Power attracted new members, and competition for profitable territory became increasingly intense. Groups that had once operated on a few city blocks were now building networks across New York. The criminal underworld was becoming more organized, more profitable, and far more difficult for authorities to control. By the 1920s, New York had become a battleground for competing criminal organizations. Different groups fought for influence over neighborhoods, gambling operations, labor racketeering, and the enormous profits created by Prohibition. But constant conflict came at a price. Leaders disappeared. Alliances collapsed, and rival groups repeatedly challenged one another for control. The most powerful criminals eventually understood that endless conflict was bad for business. They needed structure, they needed cooperation, and they needed a system capable of keeping rival organizations from destroying one another. That idea would soon change the history of organized crime in New York. Out of this turbulent period emerged Charles "Lucky" Luciano, one of the most influential figures in the development of modern American organized crime. Luciano understood that the old system of constant rivalry could not continue forever. He supported a more organized structure in which major groups could divide territories, settle disputes, and cooperate when their interests aligned. After the Castellammarese War, the old order began to collapse. A new system emerged from the chaos. New York's major Italian-American crime organizations eventually became known as the Five Families. The groups were associated with the names Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo. For the first time, New York's criminal underworld had a structure that could survive individual leaders and internal rivalries. The mafia had evolved from scattered neighborhood gangs into a much more organized criminal network. But there is an important distinction. The rise of the mafia was never the story of an entire Italian-American community. Millions of Italian immigrants came to America, worked difficult jobs, raised families, opened businesses, and became part of American society. Only a small minority became involved in organized crime. Yet that minority created an organization whose name would become internationally recognized. The story began with struggling neighborhoods and small criminal groups. Then came the Black Hand, Prohibition, competition, and eventually a new system of organized power. What started as scattered groups became something much larger, and New York became the center of one of the most studied chapters in the history of American organized crime. The Mafia did not appear overnight. It was built over decades, shaped by immigration, opportunity, competition, and the people who learned how to turn a fragmented underworld into an organized network. And that is how the story of the Italian Mafia in New York truly began.